Mona Eltahavy. I am an Egyptian writer and feminist, and I focus on Arab and Muslim issues and women's rights in my writing and in lectures and public speaking events that I take part in. In Egypt, on January the 25th, 2011, we began what I call a political revolution. A very similar political revolution began in Tunisia a month earlier, and other political revolutions began in other countries, such as Yemen, Libya, Bahrain, and Syria. And these political revolutions involved men and women together fighting against the oppression of the regime. So in the case of my country, Egypt, men and women together went to the street to fight against the dictator, Hosni Mubarak. And we succeeded in removing the dictator, Hosni Mubarak, on February the 11th of 2011. In Tunisia, they got rid of Ben Ali. In Libya, they got rid of Gaddafi. In Yemen, they got rid of Ali Abdullah Saleh. In Syria, they continue to fight against Bashar al-Assad. And in Bahrain, they continue their fight against the royal family and its oppression. Now, these political revolutions are fighting decades of dictatorship. But these political revolutions, I believe, will fail unless we begin at the same time and parallel a social and a sexual revolution. And this social and sexual revolution is about removing the dictator in our mind. So it's about removing Mubarak in our mind, the Mubarak who lives in our bedrooms, the Mubarak who lives in the living room, the Mubarak who stands on the street corner and sexually assaults women. Because Mubarak in the presidential palace is the patriarch with a big P. The Mubarak in our mind and in the bedroom is the patriarch with a small p. Because what we understood after we removed Mubarak was that the regime oppresses everybody, men and women, but our society oppresses women. And in order to have a revolution that speaks about freedom and that brings about a country that is liberated from oppression, we cannot ignore the oppression of 50% of society. You can't have freedom and you can't have revolution and you can't have liberation while 50% of society, women, are oppressed and their rights are violated. So this is something that concerns me greatly, and I'm writing a book about this, and it's the reason that I moved back to Cairo from New York, where I have been living for the past 10 years. What was the other question? Shame. Okay. One of the ways in which the regime and society tries to push women out of the public space and to make us go back home is to use sexual violence against us. So we saw the Mubarak regime begin this process or this action in 2005, a year where lots of women joined street protests. And the Mubarak regime would systematically use sexual violence against female activists and female journalists, and nobody was held accountable. And because of this impunity that the Mubarak regime used against our bodies, this gave a green light to society that it is okay to attack women's bodies. Because if the state can attack women's bodies and nobody pays a price, then everybody can attack women's bodies. And there's been sexual violence and street sexual harassment against women in many countries, in all countries of the Middle East and North Africa. This is something that happens across the world. But the difference is that in many countries there is legislation and there is a justice system that will hold the violators of women and the perpetrators of sexual violence accountable, and people will go to jail. But in most countries in the Middle East and North Africa, there is no legislation, or the legislation is not put into practice. So these men violate us and sexually violate us with impunity. And for a long time, especially when the violence came from the street, women were silent because it was considered a shame to be sexually violated like this. But since the revolution began, more and more women have been speaking out against this sexual violence. And one of the reasons that I speak out against the sexual violence is that I say, first of all, I must expose those who attacked me. And it was the regime who attacked me using the riot police. But even if the street is attacking me, even if I am groped, in public transportation or just walking on the street, I try always to speak out, and other women speak out, because we're reshifting the shame. We're saying that I have done nothing to be ashamed of. The shame belongs to the men who have attacked me. And this is a very important shift, because once you say, I am not ashamed, my honor is fine and I'm not ashamed of anything, this encourages more women to speak out, and it puts the focus on the men who violate our rights, and it says, what kind of man are you that you do this kind of violence against women? And in doing so, we turn a light, or we shine a light on men and what it means to be a man. Because now many men in Egypt, they're saying this is not the kind of man that I want to be. They're saying this is not the kind of country that I want. Because the revolution is about dignity. It's, the chant of the revolution was bread, liberty, and social justice. And if you're chanting for something like social justice, and if you're chanting for liberty, what kind of a man are you if you are silent when other men are sexually violent towards women? So this is an important social shift, and you see more and more women speak out to say that this is an important subject and we will not be silenced by shame anymore. Now, when it comes to the security forces and the military, one of the things that we must never forget is, in the same way that the Mubarak regime used sexual violence against female activists and journalists, after we got rid of Mubarak was forced to step down on February the 11th of 2011. A military junta of 19 generals took over Egypt from February 2011 until the election of Mohamed Morsi as president in August of 2012. One of the first things that they did was they cleared Tahrir Square of men and women revolutionaries. They tortured many of them, but specifically for the unmarried female revolutionaries, they used against them so-called virginity tests. These are basically sexual assaults. And they said, we must determine if you are virgins or not, so that you do not accuse us of raping you in custody, as if only a virgin can be raped, and that women who are not virgins, the rape does not count. This is the military of Egypt, and the general who decided this as a policy is a general called Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and he was made the defense minister of Egypt by Mohamed Morsi when Mohamed Morsi was president. And that same general, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, overthrew Mohamed Morsi on July the 3rd, and he is now the military ruler of Egypt. So now, the military ruler of Egypt, Sisi, is the man who allowed this so-called virginity test to be used against female revolutionaries. So it's very important to always remember this, that in Egypt we have had to choose between the military and the religious fundamentalists. Mohamed Morsi came from the Muslim Brotherhood, which are religious fundamentalists. They do not believe in gender equality, and they do not believe in women's rights. Sisi, who is now in control of Egypt, comes from the military. The military also does not believe in women's rights or gender equality. So in order to achieve freedom in Egypt, we must refuse to choose between the military and the religious fundamentalists. We must create alternatives that are not fascist, because the military is fascist and they use guns, and the religious fundamentalists are fascists and they use God. And we must break these two binaries, because fascists do not believe in freedom or in gender equality.